Season number 1 of the St. Louis Dragons franchise is now in the books. And as we enter into our very first offseason with the team, we're going to be making a lot of pivotal decisions that we need to get correct if we want to have one of the better teams in the league within the next few years. This was certainly an up and down first season for the Dragons, finishing with a record of 4-13. There were some positives, but overall the team, as expected, was pretty bad. But we did end off the season strong with a win at home against Seattle, our first win at home of the season. We will be picking second overall in the NFL draft, and today we're really going to be diving into what that means and all of the possible scenarios we have with our draft pick as it stands now entering the offseason. We're also going to be recapping the regular season, we're going to be recapping the college football season, and going over the NFL playoffs. Here's a look at the standings across the AFC. The Ravens, Jaguars, Bills, and Chiefs all won their divisions. The Raiders were certainly a surprise wild card, being joined by the Bengals and the Browns. As for the NFC, the Packers win the North. No Rodgers, no problem. Atlanta wins the South. The Cowboys get the number 1 seed. And the Niners win the West, with the 3 wild card teams being the Eagles, the Vikings, and the Los Angeles Rams, despite finishing under 500 at 8-9. We'll dive into the playoff picture a little bit closer to the end of the episode. Let's go through our team's stats, and then we will go over our studs and duds of the year, which we went through the voting in the last episode. We'll start with our team stats, most of which was obviously towards the bottom. We were in the bottom half of the league in most offensive statistics, but we weren't necessarily dead last anywhere, which is good. We were decently high in terms of rushing yards, mainly because we ran the ball a lot. And then defensively, we were dead last in yards allowed. We were by far the worst in passing yards allowed, bottom 5 in rushing. And then in points allowed, my God, we allowed 100 more than the next team, which was surprisingly the Jets, a team who on paper have a really, really good defense. Our defense was good in terms of forcing turnovers, but other than that, it was tough sledding on that side of the ball. Obviously, the passing offense was very inconsistent. Mitchell Trubisky was certainly the best quarterback we had of the 3, but there was just so much inconsistency between the quarterback play, between the receivers, and then the offensive line being mostly a disaster. I don't think the run game was horrible. DeAndre Swift was pretty good. Deontay Foreman was solid when healthy. And then Sean Tucker, the undrafted rookie out of Syracuse, was a very pleasant surprise. In the receiving game, Michael Gallup led the team in most receiving categories. Greg Dortch was our big play guy. Denzel Mims had some really good moments. And then Michael Thomas, he was kind of there for the ride. The offensive line was a mess. We had a hard time keeping guys healthy, and we had a lot of guys not play well. Now, defensively, we had one major bright spot, that being linebacker Devin White, who led the NFL in tackles and tackles for loss. He had an absolutely phenomenal season for us. He was by far the best player on the defense and one of the best defensive players in the NFL, period. He looks like he could be a real long-term building block for us, but there weren't many other players who impressed in the front 7. Our sack leader only had 4.5 sacks, being Emmanuel Ogbah and Joseph Osai. We did get some solid but inconsistent corner play from Rocky Sin and Jeff Okudah. And Caleb Farley, after a rough start to the year, played a lot better as the season went along. And then the special teams wasn't too bad. Cam Dicker was pretty good. We had 2 kick return touchdowns from Greg Dortch and Amir Smith-Marset. But the special teams did not necessarily climb us out of having a bad season. Before we do studs and duds, we're going to quickly take a look at the awards around the league, which there will not be many Dragons here, spoiler alert. Dak Prescott won the MVP, leading the Cowboys to the number 1 seed, with Doug Peterson in Jacksonville winning the Coach of the Year. Here are your AFC awards. Some of the interesting ones include Rashee Rice winning the Offensive Rookie of the Year. There's my guy Chidobe Awuzie winning the Best Defensive Back, and Joe Mixon winning the Offensive Player of the Year. As for the NFC, Devin White, 3rd in Defensive Player of the Year. Sean Tucker, 7th for Offensive Rookie of the Year, higher than first-round pick Jahmyr Gibbs. That's a surprise. Aaron Donald won a lot of awards. There's Devin White again. Rocky Sin in 5th for Best Defensive Back, and Cameron Dicker in 7th for the Best Kicker. So let's now go over our 3 studs of the year and our 3 duds of the year as voted on by you guys. We got over 450 votes. I appreciate all of the participation. Unsurprisingly, Devin White got first place for the stud of the year, gaining over 80% of the first place vote. This is very well deserved as he was by far the best player on the team, and the reward for getting first place for the stud of the year is your rating will go up by 3, and if your development trait remained unchanged during the season, then it'll be moved up. So Devin White is now an 85, and he will go up to superstar development. I thought he would automatically go up because he led the league in tackles, but unfortunately not the case. His price tag certainly rises. The whole reason why the Buccaneers left him unprotected was because of his contract. Devin White wanted to be paid as one of the highest paid off-ball linebackers in the NFL, and now he's going to get that, whether it's from us or some other team. Running back Sean Tucker ended up getting second place. This doesn't necessarily mean he was the second best player on the team, but if you compare that to his expectations being an undrafted rookie, he was really solid. He was very efficient as a runner. He led the team in rushing touchdowns, and I would argue he was our most consistent back. He gave us a good blend of big runs, but also consistency on a down-to-down basis, which is impressive for somebody who is such a low-rated player. His rating will go up by 2. He is now a 65. With morale, he is a 66. Rock Ya-Sin ends up getting third place. Ya-Sin's season started off kind of rocky, but he actually played a lot better as the year went along, and he was one of our better players on what was obviously a pretty bad defensive unit. His rating will get to go up by 1, and his development trait was boosted by the game, which kind of surprised me a little bit that they gave it to him over Devin White, but hey, I'm not complaining. So Rock Ya-Sin will move up from a 79 to an 80. Not necessarily a giant boost, but we're certainly not going to complain, especially for a guy getting older who's probably not going to progress a whole lot much longer. Zach Wilson is the loser of the dud of the year. Wilson entered the season as our starting quarterback, and he was not good at all. He does have some excuses, being that, well, there was poor receiver play, inconsistent run game, and no offensive line. But he was bad. He was a lot worse than Mitchell Trubisky, which is why I can understand him losing over the other candidates. His rating will go down by 3. He went from the highest rated quarterback on the roster now to being the lowest. Not ideal. I think it's fair to say Zach Wilson, Mormon Mahomes, MILF Bangin, mom-loving son of the gun is probably not our franchise quarterback. Michael Thomas ends up getting second place, so his rating will go down by 2. And since he has a star development, that will go down to normal. Just as Devin White was able to move his development trait up, Michael Thomas's dev trait will be going down because Zach Wilson already had normal development to begin with. Thomas missed 4 games. He finished 4th in receiving yards and 4th in receptions. Thomas is a guy who's been unable to stay healthy throughout his career, and that carried into this season. But even when he was on the field, he wasn't all that impressive, especially for being the highest rated player on our roster. So his rating will go down from an 85 to an 83, and his development will go down to normal, which is certainly a big deal. With him being 31 years old next year, he probably wouldn't have been progressing much more anyway, but this still certainly hurts him, and it's going to be harder for him to get skill points throughout his career. Darnell Savage ended up getting third place, which was to be expected. It always felt like it was down to Zach Wilson, and Michael Thomas is the most disappointing player on the team, although I did expect more out of Darnell Savage. He was very inconsistent, and he let up a lot of big plays. Oftentimes, when it was just him and the ball carrier down the field, he missed the tackle. And I don't know, I just expected more out of him. Savage is a free agent, and I'm still interested in bringing him back. But if he is re-signed, he's probably going to play a different role to where he was last year. We had him in the back end as a free safety. I don't think that's probably where he's best suited. I think having him closer to the line of scrimmage, whether it's in the box as a linebacker or in the nickel as a slot corner, probably would be the best spot for him. So now we're going to talk about our number 2 overall pick. And to add further context, we're going to talk about the entirety of this college football season. Obviously, the NCAA Next Up series has not continued into Madden 24. For those of you who are unsure of the reason, simply put, I did not have enough time because the NCAA Next Up series took a whole lot of time to put together. For those of you who are newer to the channel and have no clue what I'm talking about, last year in my Titans franchise, I had a save file on NCAA 14 where we would follow all of the draft picks through college, and I kind of wanted to still do that here, but without the whole time constraint of having another series with it. So let's recap the college football season, going over the college football playoff, who won the national championship, along with all of the major awards. So this is what the playoff bracket looked like. Ohio State, of course, has won back-to-back national championships. They are the number 1 overall seed. LSU, Navy, and Missouri all getting first-round byes as well. Here's a look at how all 12 teams ended up making the college football playoff. So those top 4 teams all won their conference championships, along with Washington in the Pac-12. They got the final spot. Washington made and lost the national championship last year. And then we have one Group 5 representative, and that was the UConn Huskies, who ended up winning the American Athletic Conference. As for the at-large bids, we had Alabama, Michigan, Middle Tennessee State, Florida, Florida State, and Notre Dame. On this graphic, I have all of the notable players from these teams who are in the draft class this year. The players whose names are bold are the guys who are currently projected to be top 50 or so picks. And then I added an asterisk next to Dasani Madison, the quarterback from Alabama, and Callaghan October, the quarterback from Michigan, as those 2 players are currently undecided on whether they are going to enter the draft class. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the storyline with those 2 in a few minutes. If you'd like to pause the video to get a better look at all of these players and teams and whatnot, feel free to do so. So now the question is, what is going to happen during the college football playoff? Who's going to win the national championship? Are we going to have any teams go on to Cinderella runs? The biggest storyline, of course, is with Ohio State. They have won 2 consecutive national championships, led by quarterback Puma Whitlock, who was the college football playoff MVP in each of the last 2 seasons. Puma is currently the projected #1 pick in this year's draft, but we have some other great quarterbacks in here as well. Otto Askew from LSU, Callaghan October with Michigan, Dasani Madison with Alabama, and Deontay Harris with Florida. So let's answer the question, will the Ohio State Buckeyes three-peat? No, they will not. The LSU Tigers, led by Otto Askew, end up winning the national championship over the Alabama Crimson Tide. Ohio State's reign of terror fell in the Final Four as they lost to the 5-seeded Crimson Tide, who played against LSU in the national championship. The Tigers ended up winning the Natty 42-32, and it ended up being a very competitive game. LSU quarterback Otto Askew threw for 331 yards and 4 touchdowns, winning the game and the college football playoff MVP. This LSU team just a couple of seasons ago was one of the worst teams in the entire country. Even last year, they only won 6 games. But this year, they've continued to accumulate talent while developing their star quarterback, Otto Askew, who's going to be a first-round pick in this year's draft. They go on to win the national championship. Along with LSU, Alabama, and Ohio State, there are some other notable storylines. Notre Dame has 5 projected top 50 picks. They lost to Middle Tennessee State. Florida loses to Florida State for a second time this year. Missouri and Navy both lose in the first round. 2 very young teams. They fall to Alabama and Michigan, who both obviously made the Final Four. Let's take a look at the awards for the college football season. Callaghan October, the quarterback out of Michigan, ended up winning the Heisman. He is a junior and, again, currently undecided on whether he wants to enter the draft class. Dasani Madison, the quarterback out of Alabama, finished in second for the Heisman, with Notre Dame running back Jared Richardson finishing in third. Otto Askew was also in the top 5, coming in fourth, while Puma Whitlock, the Ohio State quarterback, rounded out the top 5, coming in at 5th. For a large chunk of the year, it was actually Oklahoma quarterback Deacon Adderley who was the favorite to win the Heisman. He tore his MCL halfway through the season, and the entire Oklahoma team essentially collapsed. They were a favorite at one point for the national title, and they ended up not making the playoff altogether. Some other notable award winners include Jewel Chantel, the Alabama pass rusher, who was probably the best defensive player in the country. Chase Hunter, the wide receiver out of Missouri, led the team to the college football playoff. He won the Biletnikoff. The youngest player here is Ohio State left tackle Carson Selikin, who won the Outland Award. Simeon Bonnet, the pass rusher from Tennessee, won the Lombardi Award over all of the top defensive linemen in this year's draft class. Bonnet is currently projected as an early second-round pick. Could his senior season potentially rise up his stock? And then Derek Justice, the corner from LSU, had a similar fate. He's currently projected as a day 2 pick, but he won the Jim Thorpe Award over some other great DBs, including his own teammate, Nirvana Agnew, the LSU corner, who's a projected top 10 pick. And then at the bottom, Otto Askew, of course, winning the college football playoff MVP. I wanted to go over all of this information with you guys today to add some extra context with the draft class as to why certain players' stocks may go up and down. And we're going to go over all of the possible scenarios that the Dragons have with the number 2 pick going into the offseason. As the offseason goes along, things may change, but this is where everything stands now for the Dragons, who, again, currently had the second pick in the draft. The biggest storyline coming into the offseason is about the two quarterbacks who are currently undecided on whether or not they want to declare for the draft, being Callaghan October, the Heisman Trophy winner from Michigan, and Dasani Madison, the quarterback out of Alabama, who finished in second place, leading the Crimson Tide to the national championship. The Dragons are very much hoping that at least one of these two players does declare for the draft, because then there's going to be at least two blue-chip quarterback prospects, which significantly raises the value of the second overall pick. We'll start with Dasani Madison from Alabama. He decided not to declare for the draft. He'll be staying in school for one more year. This puts a lot of the pressure onto Callaghan October, and ultimately, he does decide to declare for the draft, which is great news for the Dragons. However, at the last minute, October changed his mind. He decides to stay in school one more year for Michigan. This is worst case scenario for the St. Louis Dragons, and it means we're going to have a lot more of an eventful offseason than we would have hoped for, because the value of our number 2 overall pick strongly diminishes because now there's only one quarterback at the top of the draft. Both October and Madison will be removed from the draft class, and they will be put back in next year as the top projected quarterbacks entering the year. So Puma Whitlock is now the only top quarterback in the draft, and the Buccaneers have the number 1 pick, and you would think the Buccaneers are going to pick him because Baker Mayfield is a free agent, and more so because Baker Mayfield is garbage. He's not very good. He had a horrible season this year with the Buccaneers. So as of right now, it would be a major surprise if Puma Whitlock is not the number 1 overall pick to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And so because of that, we've got a tough decision with our second overall pick. We've got a few options, though, the first of which being we keep the second pick and we pick one of the top defensive players on the board. Defense is a major need for us, and there are some great players within the trenches who would immediately be one of the best players for our defense. The next option would be for us to trade back from the second overall pick. Now, since the team who would be moving up to 2 is not moving up for a quarterback, the value of our pick does go down, but we still probably could get a lot, especially from a team maybe at the back end of the top 10, looking to get a surefire defensive stud. Those seem like the clear top 2 options for us, but there is actually a third as well. I think Otto Askew, the LSU quarterback who led his team to winning the national championship, is the wild card of this draft. As of now, he's the clear second quarterback off the board. Deontay Harris is a good player, but he seems to struggle in big games. And then Deacon Adderley is really good too, but he can't stay healthy. He's coming off a torn MCL, and he's missed 10 games over the last 2 years with Oklahoma. So that leads us to the discussion with Otto Askew, whose stock has really gone up this year. He obviously had a great season, leading LSU to the national championship. And depending on how he does during the pre-draft process, his stock really could go up. Now, there's a few different scenarios for Otto Askew, and if his stock goes up, that could really help us. The first of which being that some team falls in love with him enough to move up to the second overall pick to draft Otto Askew, while we would move down and get a lot in return. The second scenario would be that we fall in love with Otto Askew. Quarterback is obviously a position that we're going to be looking at in the offseason, and if we really like Otto Askew, if he impresses during the pre-draft process, maybe we draft him to be our franchise quarterback. And then the third scenario is maybe he impresses the Bucs so much, he becomes the number 1 overall pick. I understand how that could be pretty far-fetched, but Otto Askew was better this year than Puma Whitlock. His numbers were better. He led LSU to the national championship despite having worse talent around him, and LSU played against better teams throughout the year. Otto Askew is a stronger arm than Puma Whitlock, but Puma has a more well-rounded game, and obviously he has 2 national championships. So if the Buccaneers really like him, maybe there is a discussion on what they do with the number 1 pick, and maybe Puma falls to 2. It's unlikely, but I think it's a possibility. So obviously we talked about the 2 quarterbacks who decided not to declare for the draft, October and Madison, both of whom are staying in school. There are some other players who decided to declare for the draft at the last minute. There's not a super long list because a lot of the underclassmen I already put into the draft class, and we've already talked about them, but there are some new faces who I have added here. The notable ones include Squeezy Pryor Escobar, the tight end out of USC. He's the top projected tight end off the board. Lance Sturlovich Jr., a pass rusher also out of USC, is a very highly projected player. And then the Jimenez boys, also coming from USC, ironically, Sergio Jimenez at free safety and Gabriel Jimenez at strong safety. The two of them are not related, but they have the same last name, they come from the same school, and they're both really good. There are some other underclassmen throughout the draft, but many of those guys we've already talked about throughout the year. Let's now go through the NFL playoffs. We'll take a look at the results here of the 2023-24 playoffs, and that starts by simulating the wild card round. We'll take a look at the first 6 games of Super Wildcard Weekend, and there are some very interesting results. We'll start in the AFC with 2 wildcard teams winning. And as we go into the divisional round, we've got the big 3 of the Bengals, Chiefs, and Bills, who have all been contending for the last few years. They all have elite quarterbacks. And then we have the Raiders, who are a major surprise. In the NFC, the 2-seeded Packers get upset by the Rams. They'll play against Dallas while the Niners play the Eagles. Again, I feel like we have a big 3 here, the 3 best teams in the NFC, and then the Rams. We've also got some rematches here. The Chiefs and the Bengals play against each other again. The Niners and Eagles play against each other again. Those were our 2 conference championships last year. Unfortunately, the Cinderella runs for the Raiders and Rams come to an end. The Bills will play against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship, while the Cowboys will play against the 49ers in the NFC Championship. So which teams will be going to Super Bowl 58? Let's take a look at our game, and sure enough, we would get a rematch of the Super Bowl from a few years ago. The Kansas City Chiefs beat the Buffalo Bills. Patrick Mahomes still owns Josh Allen in the playoffs, and they will go up against the San Francisco 49ers because it's the Cowboys and it's the month of January. Those two things do not go well together. Before we talk about the Super Bowl matchup a little bit more, let's go over the Pro Bowl rosters real quick. I want to see if we've got any of our Dragons on the team. I would certainly expect to see Devin White after the season he had. Maybe not anybody else, but we'll see. The usual suspects at quarterback, including Desmond Ridder. We have some surprises at receiver, including the rookie out of Michigan State, Jaden Reed, with the Green Bay Packers. And then here's a look at the defense. We've got some young stars here, including Aiden Hutchinson and Will Anderson. Some surprises, including Osa Odigizua. And there's Devin White as the top middle linebacker. Very well deserved and no surprise at all. Other than that, we did not have any other Pro Bowlers, although I do like to see Brian Branch here. The agendas I would push if Brian Branch is a Pro Bowler as a rookie, I don't think you guys would hear the end of it if you're in my Discord, which the link to that is in the description, by the way, if you're not already there. So normally this is where I would go over the Super Bowl game, but I'm actually not going to do that today, and there's a reason for that. So I've been waiting to find good progression and regression sliders, and since next week is where the players regress, I would like to have my sliders intact. And I don't currently, but I will shortly. Mr. Hurricane, I assume all of you guys know him. If not, you're probably living under a rock. Has been working on a set of XP sliders for progression and regression. And according to him on Twitter today, he will be releasing the video of said sliders. I'll be putting a link to that in the description if you are interested in that. And I'll probably be implementing those into my series because, well, Kane is a smart guy. I trust that he knows what he's doing. And then in the next episode, we'll go over the Super Bowl. But more importantly, in the next episode will be free agency. We're going to go through our re-signings, free agency itself, trades, and other moves around the league leading up to the NFL draft. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.